We are very excited, of course, to start this program and to translate our vision and our objectives into an MA program, which will be followed, inshallah, and this is our plan, to have also a PhD followed after this MA program. This will be one of the important podiums for us to translate what we think of and what we need to achieve. The other important thing we have done this year is that we have signed an agreement with Brill, the well-known publisher in the field of Islamic studies, to start two things, two types of publications. A journal, which is called Journal of Islamic Ethics, and a book series which is called Studies in Islamic Ethics. Both the journal and the book series will accept submissions in Arabic, English, and French. And the submissions will all go through a blind review process. So you don't have to be a very well-known professor or very well-established doctor to publish. If you have a good quality, nobody will know who wrote this and where is this person is, if it's he or she. It's all blind review. And if you pass successfully the blind review, it will be published. So this is for everybody, not only for big names in the field. And I suppose all of you knows one of these three languages. So hereby the heartfelt invitation to be part of this venture. The journal and the book series, of course, the main focus is Islamic ethics. We cannot do everything, so we decided to focus on Islamic ethics. Of course, with a main something that relates to what we are doing in CILE. So the focus on principles and methods is a very important thing, and it is mentioned in the press release. Brill already made a press release on their website about initiating this journal and the book series. And the agreement was signed a few days ago in Doha. The CEO of Brill was there, and the provost of our university, Mohammed bin Khalifa University, was there, and Dr. Tariq was there, and the three of them signed the agreement. Both the book series and the journal, because you may already know how expensive the publications of Brill are, so they will be all open access, and authors do not have to pay anything. So if your manuscript is accepted, it will be published open access, and all the costs will be afforded by CILE. So the authors do not have to pay anything, and the whole world will be able to see them everywhere in the world. So they will be available in all the databases to which Brill is subscribed, but for free, that everybody can see them. So we thought this is a good thing to do also for our work. And this is not a journal, I said this many times, for our colleagues at the university, and I say it also. It's a journal facilitated by CILE, but it is not a CILE journal. So it is not that only our staff can publish. It's blind review, so reviewers will not see if it's coming from a CILE faculty or not. It's for everybody. We want to involve as many people as possible, as many voices as possible, people from different backgrounds, specializations, geographies, whatever. We are more than happy, as long as it has to do with Islamic ethics. And Islamic ethics here is not that the title should have ethics or Islamic ethics, but just the main theme and the discipline. And that it will successfully go through the peer review process. These are only two conditions. So falling within the scope of the journal or the book series, and successfully going through the peer review process, academic credentials, etc. These are the two most important things that we have done this year. We are very happy and proud of. And we hope you will be part of both ventures, and inshallah also future projects that are still in the pipeline. Thank you very much.
before giving the floor to Dr. Moctar for the first speech, I wanted just to highlight two things. The first thing is that we have, a part of the peer-reviewed academic publication, we have also a series of booklets that are, most of them are the outcome of some seminars or our seminars. So we have here two booklets that are outcomes from political, the first or the second seminar that is on political ethics. So you can have them for free here, and we have also some leaflets about with some information about the center. The second thing is that we have also among us some members of the CILE alumni. So we have, so this is the third edition. We had the two first editions where we had people coming, the two first promotions, and they made the network. And you are free if you are feeling that that the ideas of the center and the general philosophy is talking to you. You can be part of this. You can be part of the alumni, and so you can talk to them and see how you can work together and how you can join this network. We may allocate them some time to present themselves in the coming days, inshallah. So I will give the floor to Dr. Moctar for
yes, very last thing. Also, we made something new also to our work in CILE, that we organize specialized seminars in which we discuss specific issues, and usually before we used to do them by invitation. So we see who published on these topics, etc., and we invite them to come and present. Now we have a space that we made for call for papers, and those we make an ad on our website, and those who are interested to present papers on this, and these submissions also go through review process internally in CILE. They get invited and they come and participate in the seminar. So again, you are also more than welcome. And if you know people who can submit, we have now the call for paper going on for the next seminar, which will be in September, by the end of September. We have call for papers on Ijtihad. So hopefully after the end of this summer school, you will get some ideas. It starts with abstract. You submit an abstract, and if the abstract is accepted, you are invited to write a paper, and then the paper is reviewed to see if it will be presented in the seminar or not. And the proceedings of the seminar will be published either in the Journal of CILE or in the book series of CILE. So I also wanted to say this.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Creative ijtihad, what does that mean? I think we should go back to understand what ijtihad means before talking about creative ijtihad. And this is why I will try to explain first before I pose my view on transparency or creative ijtihad. This cross-disciplinary ijtihad. What I called it here cross-disciplinary ijtihad. My talk will be on, as you can see, the modern approach to ijtihad, and going back to the history of contemporary ijtihad. It's very important to understand how it's going, how it was, and how it went, and how it's going now. I mean, the thinking of ijtihad in contemporary era. So Islamic jurisprudence is founded on the principle that there should be a ruling ordained by God for each incident in life. And these rulings refer either to the party which announces and elucidates the ruling, initially the Prophet's task, and later on was undertaken by the Mufti or the executive authority, which was usually presented by the judge and or the caliph. As a profession, Islamic jurisprudence emerged by the end of the first Hijri century, and the juristic infrastructure expanded to incorporate the four Sunni schools of jurisprudence: Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, each named after its imam. These schools only became known as such after the death of the founders themselves, thus turning into the so-called jurisprudential tradition since the mid-4th Hijri century. By the maturing of these juristic schools, fiqh per excellence started be what these schools produce, including both fundamentals and detailed rulings, usul and furu'. The proper task of the jurists started to be confined within the borders of the school by building upon the fundamentals of the schools and working them out. Hence, the practice of ijtihad, independent legal reasoning, in its absolute and most rigorous form became exclusive to the authoritative imams within each school. The remaining jurists within each school became to be known as eligible for practicing just a restricted form of ijtihad, and the general Muslim public were just imitators, muqallidin. During this lecture, I will, or we will focus on the following items. Yeah, you did it. Okay, the first one, ijtihad and interpretation, originating or discovering the meaning. And number two, recalling ijtihad and breaking taqlid. Number three will be on contemporary ijtihad and renewing taqlid. And the last point is ijtihad in religion, the cross-disciplinary ijtihad. Let's go to the first point, ijtihad and interpretation, originating the meaning, originating or discovering the meaning. Ijtihad literally means endeavor or self-exertion. As a technical legal term, it refers to the endeavor exerted by a jurist in order to construe a religious ruling, hukum, on the basis of evidence, dalil, found in the sources of legislation. I'll explain later the sources of legislation. Ijtihad is contrasted to taqlid, literally imitation, a term which refers to the uncritical acceptance of a ruling. Thus, the ruling is accepted out because it is properly extracted from an evidence related to the source of legislation, not only for that, but because the trust that one has in the authority of one or more jurists. Essential to the meaning of the term ijtihad is the concept that the endeavor of the jurist involves exerting one's utmost effort, istifragh al-wusa'. Bernard Wise explained that ijtihad roughly corresponds to what is called interpretation, ta'wil, in Western jurisprudence. The two terms are, of course, not exact equivalents because their lexical meanings are not the same, and because ijtihad includes an activity which is not normally subsumed under interpretation. Nonetheless, there is a definite correspondence between the two. For the greater part of the activities entailed in ijtihad are indeed interpretive activities. The attempt to draw a ruling from a recognized source is tantamount to interpreting the source. On the other hand, those Arabic terms which may seem to present themselves more readily as equivalents of interpretation, such as tafsir and ta'wil, actually have meanings in classical Arabic, which are more specialized than that of legal interpretation in the broad sense intended here. Strictly speaking, it is not the law as such which is interpreted, but rather the sources of law. The law as a topically organized finished product consisting of precisely worded rulings is the result of juristic interpretation. It stands at the end, not at the beginning, of the interpretive process. Yet it would not be acceptable to speak of those who interpret the sources as in any sense creating law. We are talking here about Islamic law, or what we usually call it Islamic law. It is much more appropriate to refer to the interpreter as one who discovers the law, not creator of the law. The theory of Ijtihad presupposes that the process of producing rulings is a process of elucidating that which is present but yet is not self-evident. In principle, the Muslim jurist never invents ruling. He formulates or attempts to formulate rulings which God has already decreed and which are concealed in the sources. These rulings, which constitute the ideal law of God, exist objectively above and beyond all juristic endeavor. The substantive sources from which all rulings of law in Islam, according to the mainstream Sunni perspective, must be derived are the Quran, the Sunnah or tradition of the Prophet, and the consensus of the Muslim jurists. Of course, the fourth one is analogy. The Quran is the basic scripture of Islam. The Verbium Dei, literal word of God, Kalimatullah. The Sunnah consists of the inspired sayings and deeds of the Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as recorded in a genre of literature known as hadith or hadith. Both of these sources are clearly textual in character and are accordingly designated as nas, plural nusus in Arabic term. The consensus of the Muslim jurists may also be regarded as an essentially textual source because it is expressed in the consensual statements of jurists. The process of deriving rulings from these sources is thus a process of interpreting texts. Interpretation of Islamic law is exclusively text-oriented. Now, let's move to the second point, main point, recalling Ijtihad and breaking taqlid. Thoughts on the concept of Ijtihad in contemporary era have passed through many different junctures and contexts. For example, in the late 19th century, a group of Salafi reformists in Damascus tried to think unconventionally under the label of Ijtihad. The attempt made by this group was banned, and this incident was historically named the Mujtahideen incident. It was in 1895. On the other hand, the Ottoman reformists who began the process of modernization initiated a lengthy debate within the religious milieu about Ijtihad. This debate on ijtihad continued among reformists in Egypt, Syria, and Tunisia since in the end of the 19th century, and then intensified again in the second half of the 20th century, where many writings appeared on the definition, conditions, necessities, and applications of ijtihad, and the qualifications of the mujtahideen, besides many other related issues. Many people with different educational backgrounds, specializations, and convictions have engaged in the debate on ijtihad, and thus have various methods, motives, and objectives in this regard. The school-based juristic tradition has preserved its presence and authority over the centuries, and has been able to accommodate the new developments and novel issues by employing the mechanisms of the school itself. However, since the end of the 19th century, the pre-modern techniques of the schools were unable to address the modern developments and to absorb the breathtaking changes. This resulted in the outdatedness of the single school approach, and preference was given to choose from within the four schools. And personal status legislations based on the single doctrine started subsequently to borrow from the other doctrines, motivated by public interest, as was the case in Syria, Tunisia, and Iraq since the mid-20th century. In the light of these changes, the pillars of the Islamic reform movement advocated the necessity to open the door of ijtihad and abandon imitation. Hence, the emergence of several fatwas on the new issues by Mohammed Abdo, Rashid Rida, Mustafa Zarqa, Mohammed Abu Zahra, etc., among other jurists. The complex and conflicting developments led to the rise of the idea of collective ijtihad, and a number of councils were established since the 1970s. The most prominent of these are the Islamic Fiqh Council in Mecca, established in 1977, and the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, established in Jeddah 1948, and the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, founded in 1984, in the context of the emergence of the field of medical ethics, and following the first case of birth through artificial insemination, 1978, which brought to the fore the ethical challenges that had to be addressed from an Islamic perspective. Now, let's move to the third point: the contemporary ijtihad and renewing taqlid. In the classical era, jurisprudence dealt with the new developments through ijtihad in one of two types or ways. The first was deduction or analogy, modeled on parallel derived rulings stipulated by the imams of the schools, and the second way is inference from legal evidence in accordance with the principles of the imam of the school regarding extrapolation. However, the modern radical changes have confused contemporary jurists, and this is visible in the decision of some scholars to stop issuing fatwas on several issues. This contemporary ijtihad meant departure from the tradition and its old hierarchy, as it also meant detachment from the authority of the school itself, whose pre-modern parameters could not embrace these major changes. Therefore, the Islamic Fiqh Council in Mecca determined its mission to the task of stating the legal provisions pertaining to the emerging problems and occurrences on the basis of recognized sources of Islamic legislation. Nonetheless, two main directions in contemporary ijtihad on fiqh al-nawazil in general can be observed. Number one is the deduction of or analogical approach, al-takhrij wal-qiyas, and number two is the approach of overall objectives and rules, مقاربة مقاصد الشريعة والقواعد العامة. The deductive or analogical approach. Analogy is the mainstream approach adopted by jurists who practiced ijtihad in order to construe the ruling for an issue about which there is no text in the Quran and Sunnah or Sunnah. As a result of school-based tradition, the process shifted by time from the use of analogy in dealing with Sharia texts to dealing with the texts of the school's imam. If, for instance, no text could be found in the school to interpret a given incident, nor could the matter be treated within the overall philosophy conveyed by the text, the school-based mujtahid proceeds to infer the ruling by using analogy based on similar or equal manifestations of the incident in the school itself, which is called deductive or takhrij. Takhrij. Deductive takhrij. The jurisprudential competency of the jurist is measured according to his ability to draw analogies and deductions. This approach prevailed in classical times in the context of the nawazil, literally predicaments, the technical term used for expressing the novel issues. Now, number two, the approach of overall objectives and rules. Objectives are defined as the set of meanings and wisdoms envisaged by the legislator in all or most of the cases of legislation. They reflect the rational perception adopted in the absence of a direct text and encompass public interest, المصلحة العامة أو المصالح المرسلة, the closing of loopholes, سد الذرائع, and the application of discretion, al-istihsan, which is to decide upon a matter on the basis of its parallels, which implies departure from analogy for the sake of a desirable interest. The concept of objectives was part of investigative areas of jurisprudential analogy, but it has been expanded to become a mechanism to override partial analogy itself. The basic ruling is the jurisprudential tradition is that the jurist, as previously mentioned, builds his judgments on deduction, but several of collective and individual fatwas have gone further to build either on objectives and interests or on the overall jurisprudential principles in response to the pressure of the modern times and their constantly changing developments. The invocation of overall objectives and principles was initiated by the reformists in their endeavor to align with the West and to lay the foundations for the concept of the institutions. Since the 1970s, however, the urgent need to produce detailed fatwas applicable to all new developments has impelled many muftis and jurisprudential councils to follow the reformist approach. Given that the fatwa concerning new developments is required to prevent suspension of the Sharia, while deduction in accordance with jurisprudential precedents is no longer possible in all new situations. Now let's move to the last point, main point in my talk. Ijtihad in religion, the cross-disciplinary ijtihad. The above-mentioned discussions remained confined within the discipline of jurisprudence, its own logic and mechanism, and that is why I am inclined to call it traditional renewal. The juristic tradition reflected the spirit of the pre-modern world and demonstrated unparalleled capacity to deal with this world. However, the approach of traditional renewal is trying to employ the pre-modern tradition by addressing the modern issues through the pre-modern mechanisms, or at the other extreme, though getting completely immersed in the spirit of the Western tradition. That is why today we see a lot of anomalies and selectivity which may have betrayed the overall objective or the higher value that Islam wanted to achieve. As examples, we can refer to the attempts to combine between the penalty for apostasy and the value of freedom in the modern world, or between obeying the ruler and the concept of modern nation state. The type of ijtihad which we propose in this context is the cross-disciplinary ijtihad. Ijtihad in religion, as the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his hadith said, the one who renews the religion of the ummah, not only the jurisprudence, for religion is an expression of man's vision of himself, existence, position in the universe, and his relation with the other creatures, either in submission to God along with all other creatures, or as an anomaly from all others. It is also man's deeds, behavior, and reaction towards the universe and existence as per this vision. It is an expression of the relation between the servant and the creator through two channels: the divine obligations in respect to knowledge and work on one hand, and the human commitment to existence on the other hand. Therefore, this cross-disciplinary ijtihad would embody the monotheistic vision, as religion is a monotheism that transcends the separation between the religion and mundane, the religious and mundane, or the distinction between the scriptural sciences, which resulted from the revelation, and the rational sciences resulting from the perception and experience, towards the Quranic monotheistic vision, which uses the term dunya, world, purely as a time frame not separated from the monotheistic meaning that sees in every worldly material circumstances a spiritual otherworldly. a spiritual, otherworldly dimension. Ijtihad here transcends beyond the logic of ijtihad of jurisprudence, which is partial and rationing in character, towards the awareness of history and its impact on the movement of thought and the building of concepts, in addition to the review of the mental and intellectual patterns and structures that have dominated over the Islamic thinking throughout the classical and modern historical eras. Thank you. It was an incident in the end of the Ottoman Empire in Damascus at the end of the 19th century, and that group contains the Jamal al-Din al-Qasimi, Mohammed Tahir al-Jazairi, Salim al-Bukhari, Abdul Aziz al-Bukhari, and others. And they were calling for ijtihad or Salafi ijtihad in that time, in the sense of that time. And at that time there were a conflict between the Ottoman authority and Wahhabism. And they claim that they are Wahhabism. They are Wahhabi. So, but they were not. So it was the reformist Salafists. They were reformist Salafists or Salafi reformists at that time, and they were trying to read the sources directly, not via juristic tradition. So, and this is why they took to the judge, and they put in prison.
So in a way, maybe they're moving
because in Ottoman authority used to push the people to be direct to Hanafi jurisprudence school. So, and this is why. So it was not allowed to go beyond the Hanafi school.
Was there specific issues that sparked it?
No, it was in general. Yeah. Not really in that incident, specific incident, because they were reading hadith sources, and they were critical to the situation of jurisprudence in general. And as we may know from the work of Jamal al-Din al-Qasimi, he was not critical as a reformist. And this is why Mohammed Rashid Rida wrote in his Al-Manar journal, very famous journal, when Jamal al-Din al-Qasimi died, and he said, he wrote an essay on Mohammed Jamal al-Din al-Qasimi, and he said he was not really reformist in the sense that we are talking about, but he was good man. So, and if you check the work of Jamal al-Din al-Qasimi, he's very, very high scholar, but he stayed traditional, but in different sense. He was not accurate or defined of the Hanafi school or the traditional school, in the sense that it was applied in that time. So there's I think a complicated context for this incident, because I didn't want to go in depth with that incident, but I just mentioned that incident to understand the complicated of recalling ijtihad at that time. We are talking about the end of the 19th century.
May I just add something explanatory note to this, because it may sound very strange in your mindset. What is the problem that some people will get together to read hadith sources and tafsir, etc. It was a challenge for an Ottoman tradition which was also political and not only religious. It's something very close now. We are here in the West. When you have a system, a legal system, and you want to establish Sharia courts, for instance, the whole system will get disturbed and you will have a problem. Not just because you want to think freely or whatever, but the whole system will be disturbed.
Yeah.
So in the Ottoman Empire, the Hanafi tradition was the system that consolidates the empire. So if you want to bring out or to think of not necessarily issuing fatwas, but in this way you are disturbing the whole system of the empire, and this was a problem. Not that these people were so revolutionary and that they inspired all the traditions that came after, etc. Even Rashid Rida was saying that they were not as far as we were. But was Rida in this time, would he have been able to do something more than what they did? So you need to judge the people in their own context. It was almost unimaginable to challenge the system and keep the example of Sharia courts here in the West in your mind. People will be disturbed because the system will be disturbed.
Yeah, and we are not talking here about the political dimension only. We have two dimensions, religious and social dimension and political dimension at that time. And this is why Mohammed Rashid Rida, when he went to Damascus and he gave a talk in the Umayyad mosque, he faced troubles with people because of his thoughts in the Umayyad mosques at that time. So we have there is a harmony between the social and religious dimension and political dimension at that time. There are many writings on this field or this topic that we are talking about. So of course I advise you to read Wael Halaq's work. Yeah, it's very interesting, and he went in depth in these topics in general. But we have other works, of course, in Arabic and English. And it's much important to understand the historical context itself. So I can mention here the Fatigue of Sharia by Ahmed Atif, and the Fall of Sharia, صعود وسقوط, Dr. Shinqiti, the rise and fall of Sharia. And Sami Zubaydah, the Sharia wa Sulta, the Sharia and power in Muslim societies in modern times, I think, or something. And among others, other writings. Regarding to the second point that about the role of Mohammed Abdu. Mohammed Abdu is jadali, controversially, and I think he was very revolutionary jurist or scholar at his time. So and if you look, he played many roles in his life, as a mufti, as a judge, as a political activist, and other teacher, and other roles. So and this is why it depends on the angle that you are looking at him, and which work are you referring to, or reading to him. So in my opinion, I think I respect Mohammed Abdu, of course, very much, but I am critical to Mohammed Abdu at the same time, because I see Mohammed Abdu maybe if I were him at that time, I will behave like him. But he was very adaptive. His work was for more adaptation or tawa'umi, adaptation كان أكثر تواؤما, more adaptational than he
for his time, yes.
for his time, yeah. And this is why I said, if I were him, I think maybe I will behave like him. So I don't know. But we should put him in his time and judge on him in his time. So we are not judging him. We don't have to judge him for our time. So, and we have to, it's very important to understand the historical context and social political context, and to have to understand the full image of Mohammed Abdu.
So for Wa'il Halaq, you recommend us to
Yes, yeah. Sheikh Chauki is not satisfied with that, but okay.
If I may have 3 questions.
Yeah. But just sorry, Wa'il Halaq is writing in the English context, so we have to keep this in mind, because maybe sometimes in Arabic context it's not useful to use Wa'il Halaq sometimes, you know. And he told me that he is aware of that, so he's writing to the English reader, not the Arabic reader, and he told me that himself. Yeah, a very important difference between contemporary and adaptation. So I am contemporary researcher. I don't want to say scholar, but I'm not trying to adapt with what is existing in the reality, and this is a very important difference. For Mohammed Abdu, I think he was trying to be modern or contemporary to his time, but he followed the adaptation way. So to be modern or contemporary is to keep your faith and to deal with the reality critically. So if we look for, if we check Mohammed Abdu's work, we will see that most of the time he was following or trying to adopt the Islamic tradition, or the Islamic tradition with the Western tradition, or the Western knowledge that it was dominant at that time.
Just to bring the question to specific another level, is it not possible to be yes, I am to be critical to your standpoint and to that of Abdu or any other scholar, that maybe, as a question, you think that he is adaptational because his reality passed already and we look at it from outside. So maybe you think you are critical, he thought the same.
Yeah.
And only the main difference that happened is that his reality passed. That's why we think we are different. And maybe when our reality also will pass, people will come to say they were very adaptation. It isn't this just a question.
Yeah, it's yes. Yeah. That's important, too. So I think no, it's not that. It's not like that. It's when we look at the methodology of Mohammed Abdu, he was adaptational. So because his methodology was to position, to place the Western values in the Islamic tradition. So, and here we are talking about the methodology of dealing with the reality. Now, I don't need to come 50 years later to see that Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi is adaptational. He is, and he's selective. He is aware of selectivity methodology that he's following. So, and I have a problem with this methodology. I mean, I'm talking about selectivity.
What do you mean by selective methodology?
Intiqai. So, and we had a lot of problems because of the selectivity. So I don't need to come 50 years later to understand that he was adaptational. So I'm talking about the one who is alive, still alive, and I know him. So it's not a matter of time. This is what I'm saying. It's not a matter of time to be aware that which is adaptational and which is who is adaptational and who is not. It's a matter of methodology and the priorities of your interest and how to deal with things, with the issues, the novel issues. You know, it's a matter of vision and methodology. It's not a matter of time to understand or to be aware of. For example, he was. I'm not saying that adaptation is negative all the time. No, it's not that. Sometimes you have no other option. Okay, but you have to be aware of that there is no other option, and you are doing that. So I'm not claiming that, okay, to be critical. Muhammad Abdu, of course, he was critical to his tradition, but not, and sometimes to the Western tradition, sometimes. But when it was very clear that there's a contradiction between two traditions. Regarding this, the second point, Malik bin Nabi, Sheikh Shinqiti is very interested in Malik bin Nabi, and he's talking about on him all the time. Malik bin Nabi, of course, he was a reformist, and he was very critical to the Muslim societies, and especially on the Mashru' al-Nahda, the Renaissance. But if I will use the term of Radwan Sayyid, he was revivalist. He was revivalist and Ihya'i. So and the revivalist, because we differentiate between two terms, revivalism and reformation. الإصلاح and الإحياء. The reform was the main question of the reform was how to كيف نتقدم, how to be like the West, how to advance and to be like the West. And the main question of the revivalism was how to protect our identity. And this is the transform between the reform movement and the revival movement from Mohammed Abdu and his school to Hassan al-Banna and his school. So Malik bin Nabi is a part of this school, I mean revivalism. So the main question that for revivalism was how to protect our identity. So it's a matter of the question, and the very interesting book on this historical intellectual this intellectual history, which I advise you to read if you can read Arabic, the work of Fahmi Jad'an, أسس التقدم عند مفكري الإسلام. أسس التقدم عند مفكري الإسلام, Fahmi Jad'an. Yeah, Fahmi Jad'an. It's available as a PDF form online, I think.
Sorry, just for the intiqai, I don't understand exactly what do you mean by intiqai for adaptation about Yusuf Qaradawi and what topics you mean by intiqai?
Sheikh Qaradawi talks about two types of ijtihad. الاجتهاد الانتقائي, the selectivity ijtihad, and الاجتهاد الإنشائي, the original ijtihad. It's not creative.
Originating
Originating ijtihad. Okay. So, and what he means in selectivity ijtihad, he means that we come to the tradition, the juristic tradition, and to select what is valid to apply for our times. And sometimes when you select in different issues, and then at the end, the result will be very contradiction. You will have contradicted issues, contradicting issues at the end. And this is why we have a lot of problems with I have a lot of critiques of work on the work of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi. If I understood you well, I think we can. The last year I talked here in this place. I talked about the spirit of the world, the spirit of the world, and we have to be aware that we are living in the Western world or the Western time. And I'm aware of that, even if I was living in Tunisia or Morocco or wherever. So because of many reasons, and we have to admit that it's a Western time. It's not the Islamic time as it was in the historical. I'm using Islamic here in the sense of culture and politics. So, and we have to differentiate between the spirit of the world and the local or speciality of the values or system. When I say that we are living in the Western time, I mean that the challenges and the structures and the modern states and the state apparatus, everything is coming from the West, and technology and infomedia revolution and so etc. And at the same time we can differentiate between the Western values and the Islamic values at some point, not all the time, at some point. And at the same time, we can use another term that it's the universal values. And it's very problematic issue to explain what does that mean, universal values. I believe that there are universal values for each time. I mean, now, if we are talking about the freedom, it's a universal value, in my opinion. I will not say that, okay, this is a Western value and I'm not a part of it. No, it's a universal value now, to talk about freedom. But how to understand the freedom and how to apply it, it's not universal. And for the classical time, the freedom was not the universal values in the classical times. Not for only the Muslim societies. No, for Roman, for Byzantium societies, for all the societies at the classical times. And this is why we can find apostasy punishment for the apostasy punishment in the classical times in different cultures. Judaism, in Byzantium, Roman, Muslim societies, and Christian churches. So, because the religious freedom was not a universal value in the classical times. But now it is a universal value. But we cannot talk about the gay rights as a universal value now. It's not a universal value. It's a Western value, maybe. Or not really exactly even a Western value. But they claim that. So, but we still have a lot of discussion on that. We don't know 100 years later, it will be a universal value or not. So it's a historical movement. It's a matter of the history, the movement of the history, and the result of a lot of discussion and work on different dimensions, scholarly and social dimension, political dimension too. I have 2 points to react on this comment or question. The first one is that I think, let me be critical here. Sometimes we feel like the terms are using their meaning, and this is why we feel like we need to put something else together. So, and this is why we use radical reform, because or Tariq Ramadan used radical reform, because I think he felt that reform is not enough anymore. And this is why he put radical reform, because everyone now is using reform. So, and this is why I'm coming to this. So, and this is why we used to use ijtihad as a term, and now, okay, some of us maybe feel like it's not enough because everybody is using ijtihad, so we have to put something else to show that we are different, or to express our ideas or vision in a different way, to say that we are different from others. And this is why I think he was asking how do you see ijtihad of Salafists. And this is why, okay, we used creative ijtihad to say that ijtihad is not enough anymore to use. So I don't say that, and I don't believe that, but I don't believe this way to express the ideas, I mean. And Max Weber has a very good idea on that he said when you شيوع بعض الألفاظ, popularity of some terms, making it or making them less than make their meaning less than before. And this is why we think that we are trying to solve this problem, or some of us trying to solve this problem with putting another word all the time. Radical reform, creative ijtihad, or whatever. So, and we have to be careful with this type of expressions. So ijtihad is ijtihad. So if we have to be careful that, okay, as for example our colleagues used to, or trying to use, to keep all the time contemporary ijtihad, contemporary issues, contemporary fiqh, jurisprudence. So we are facing the same problem here, because jurisprudence is contemporary to its time all the time. And now when I am talking about ijtihad without any other word with it, so I'm talking about a new ijtihad or contemporary ijtihad in a new perspective or new perception. This is the first point. The second point, that when I said تجديد التقليد, renewal tradition, traditional renewal, I meant that I was not talking about single deeds or single thought or single issue. I was talking about the whole structure of the tradition, Islamic tradition, or Islamic jurisprudential tradition. the whole structure, and then the role of the renewal tradition, renewal taqlid, or renewing taqlid, is renew taqlid is to make like a type of selectivity, to adapt between your tradition, Islamic tradition, our Islamic tradition, to the Western tradition, and to find a solution for problems. And this is what I meant, that to renew taqlid. I want to say again that it's a matter of spirit of the world, and the spirit of the system of the tradition, and the system of the modern world. So it's not a matter of finding solutions for problems all the time and to replace or find place for each problem in your tradition or in his tradition. It's a matter of the whole structure and the mechanisms and the methodology and the vision and etc. So this is what I meant. So they're trying to use the pre-modern mechanisms to solve the modern problems. Regarding creative ijtihad, Sheikh Chauki will talk about that later in detail. And regarding to the second point, I believe that there are principles in the text itself, but how can we gain these principles? It's a matter of interpretation, and the interpretation is a part of the culture and cultural context and knowledge, the level of the knowledge for each time. And this is why, for example, we couldn't, or our scholars in the tradition, they couldn't gain that the religious freedom is a principle in the Quran. They couldn't understand that in the classical era, but now we understand that. And at the same time, when we talk about the slavery, they couldn't gain that, or they couldn't realize that free the servants or slavers is a principle in Islam, in the Quran, and they couldn't realize that. And this is why we have a lot of traditional jurisprudence on slavery. And at the same time, in the same case with Jewish jurisprudence. There's a very similarity between Jewish jurisprudence and Islamic jurisprudence on slavery. Because the freedom in this sense was not universal value in the classical time for everybody, not for Muslims. And they couldn't realize that meaning, that principle in the Quran. When I read the Talmud and the Sharia of the Halakha, I see the same. There is a very similarity between Islamic jurisprudence and Jewish jurisprudence in this regard, in this topic, because they couldn't get. We believe that the principle is existing in the text, but how can we gain that, or how can we catch that principle? This is the matter of interpretation again.
So are you saying that the principle is universal, but the articulation of the principle may not be universal? I mean, it's historically freedom and freedom of religious freedom, etc. Historically is not a universal principle, not because there is no universal principle, but because the historical context makes that this principle cannot be articulated.
It was not active.
Yes.
It was not activated.
Yeah. So there is a universal.
Yes.
There is a universality, but historical context make that this universality cannot be articulated because of the context.
I didn't mean that Jewish jurisprudence and Islamic jurisprudence are the same or equivalent. No, I didn't mean that. But I said there are similarities in some cases, or some ways of dealing with the text and the context. And when I say that there is similarity because regarding to the point that was posed by Sheikh Chauki, yes, there are principles in the context, in the text itself. But how can we realize that? We believe that there are universal values in the revelation, because we believe that the revelation is transcended or crossed the history. So, but how can we realize these, or how to be sure that these principles are the same principles that the revelation wanted us to apply or to rely on? This is a matter of interpretation. And we have to differentiate between 2 points here. To the absolute right and the ghalib al-dhan.
Presumptions and high probability.
High probability. So I am God asked us to follow the high probability and to follow what we think that it's the principle of the God after Ijtihad. And then maybe I'm wrong, I'm not right, but I'm okay, because God asked me to follow what I think after Ijtihad it's the word of the God, or the principle of the God that God asked me to follow. So it's not a matter of absolute right. And this is the difference between the principles are existing in the text as every Muslim believe, or every Jewish believe, or every Christian believe, and the application of the text and the interpretation of the text, or these principles that we are supposed to follow and to apply in the reality. In general, yeah, there's priorities. There are priorities and ranks of these sources. But in fact, and in the applied level, no, it's not. It's not that case, because sometimes you have to combine between Quran and Sunnah at the same time, and Quran and Sunnah and Ijma'. If you are coming late, very late, and because you don't believe that there is a consensus against of the text in principle, and you have to understand the whole tradition in light of the text of the Quran, text of the Sunnah, and to understand what happened during the history and how they came out to this result at the end. So in this case, you are looking at the whole resources at the same time, and you are trying to combine between them. If you are a jurist, the matter is different. The first case, if you are a researcher and doing research and trying to understand what happened during the history. The second case, if you are a jurist, and even the matter is different, because you are supposed to look at the first step to the Quran itself. But sometimes it's not clear in the Quran, because we know that the nature of the Quranic text is different from the nature of the Sunnah text, because the Quran has his own method dealing with things, with issues, principles, creed, and jurisprudence, and rulings, etc. So it's very general most of the time, and Quran is not going in depth or in details. with a lot of issues. But the Quran explains the principles and the vision, and especially in the creed. And we have a lot of discussion, jurisprudential discussion on the rulings in the Quran. Ayat al-Ahkam, the verses of we're talking about rulings, jurisprudential rulings. And we have a lot of discussion in the tradition, Islamic tradition, about how many verses that we have in the Quran we're talking on the jurisprudential rulings. Some of them said that there are 70 verses. And some of them there are 700 verses. And in between we have many options. So there is a lot of discussion on the Ayat al-Ahkam, the verses that we're talking about rulings, jurisprudential rulings. So this dichotomy was this dichotomy, or this controversial issue discussion was based on different elements. What do you mean by ayah? Is it the ayah in the Quran, or the sentence in the Quran? What do you mean by ahkam? What do you mean by hukum, the ruling? Do you mean that just ethical ruling, or jurisprudential ruling, or what do you mean? And how do you look at the verses? Are you talking about the explicit or implicit meaning in the Quran? If you are talking about the explicit, so there are very few. If you are talking about implicit meanings, there are many, or too much. So there are a lot of discussion. If you apply this, or if you're aware of this, and coming to your question, you will find the case is not simple as you think. It's the first, the Quran. If I didn't find, I will go to the Sunnah. They say that, they usually say that, but it's not the case in practice, I mean. So because the text, the nature of the Sunnah text is very detailed, and we have a lot of prophetic reports. And this is why we have a lot of opinions, because it's a matter of how to understand the Quran and the Sunnah. And if you didn't find in the Quran and the Sunnah how to use the analogy based on the Quran and the Sunnah, and which verses verses and prophetic tradition reports are you trying to use or select. So it's a very complicated way. But yeah, in general, we have problems in our tradition. We have problems with dealing with the Quran. Yes. So it's a matter of methodology, and I don't believe that the methodology of Mufassirin, exegetes went in a good way. No.
It is time to break now. We're a few minutes late. I know there are a lot of questions, but we have the whole afternoon to discuss, inshallah. So keep your questions, write them down, and you will have the chance this afternoon to ask them. So we will start with this sister over there, and those who didn't have the chance to ask their question, they will have this afternoon, inshallah. So 10 minutes break, and see you after the break, inshallah.